You know that feeling when someone asks, "How old are you?" It seems like such a simple question, right? But suddenly the answer feels like it carries so much weight. Or maybe you've seen those headlines about demographic catastrophes right alongside stories celebrating, remarkably spry 100-year-olds.
Yeah, it's whiplash sometimes.
It really is. It's confusing, isn't it? It leaves us wondering, what does it really mean to grow old in today's world?
It's a huge question.
Exactly. So today, we're taking a deep dive into something that touches every single one of us: aging. We're drawing from an absolutely extraordinary source today, a book called Aging as Future. Now, this book distills over a decade of groundbreaking international research, generously funded by the Volkswagen Foundation.
It's a monumental piece of work.
It really seems like it. Our mission today is to unpack the essential and often really surprising findings from this massive study. We want to help you cut through all that noise and navigate the often conflicting narratives around what it truly means to grow older. We'll explore why our common ideas about aging are frequently based on pretty outdated assumptions, how our personal experiences get tangled up with broader societal perceptions, and what this all means for how we live and, importantly, prepare for our own futures. So just to kick things off, what stands out to you about the very idea of getting older?
Well, it's such a fundamental question, isn't it? And what's so compelling about this source, this book, is its sheer breadth and depth. I mean, this isn't just one person's opinion or a single study.
Right.
It's a culmination of insights from over 40 researchers across 3 continents, synthesizing more than 200 scholarly publications and numerous doctoral dissertations. It's massive.
About 40 researchers.
Yeah. And they didn't just rely on one method, which is crucial. They used this really rich blend, structured questionnaires with quite sophisticated measures to capture, the really nuanced aspects of age perceptions. Then there were detailed online surveys that even incorporated these clever graphical elements, like sliders on a timeline. Yeah, to intuitively map out people's subjective timelines for aging. And then, crucially, they did deep, problem-centered, qualitative interviews, often delving into biographical narratives to really understand individual experiences and perceptions, how people make sense of it all.
So numbers and stories together.
Exactly. This multi-method, multicultural approach involving countries like Germany, the US, Hong Kong, Taiwan, the Czech Republic, over a period of up to 10 years for some parts, it gives us an incredibly rich and nuanced picture. It lets us move beyond those simple assumptions and truly grasp the complex reality of what aging means. It's about understanding the individual's lived experience, but always within that larger societal context.
Okay, so let's unpack this, starting with that big societal picture.
Yeah.
When we talk about an aging society, especially in places like Germany, which, as you mentioned, was a central focus here, the conversation almost immediately shifts into, well, warning signs, doesn't it?
It often does, yeah. Alarm bells.
We hear a lot about declining birth rates, a growing proportion of older people. But for you, for me, for any individual listening, what does this demographic shift actually translate to? What are the human implications beyond just the statistics?
That's such a crucial point because the statistics, while obviously important, they often mask the human reality.
Yeah.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Germany, like many other developed nations, has definitely undergone a dramatic demographic shift over the past few decades. For a long time, there was a kind of abstinence from explicit population policy, maybe as a post-war reaction. Former Chancellor Adenauer famously quipped, "People always have children." Kind of dismissive.
Right, just let it happen.
Pretty much. But since the turn of the millennium, especially with public figures like Frank Schirmacher in 2004 or Thilo Sarrazin in 2010 entering the fray with very different, often quite polarizing takes on demography, well, population change just rocketed to the top of the socio-political agenda.
It became a hot topic.
Yeah, a really hot topic. And the numbers from this study, they're stark. They paint a really clear picture of this shift. The number of people under 18 in Germany, for instance, is projected to fall from just under 14.4 million back in 2018 to around 13.4 million by 2060.
Okay, a drop.
A noticeable drop. But meanwhile, the proportion of those over 67 is set to rise significantly, from 15.9 million to over 21 million in that same period.
Wow, that's a big jump.
It's huge. Think about it. By 2060, a little over a third of the population, 30%, will be either under 20 or over 67.
All right.
Only maybe 18% of people in Germany might be under 20, but a full 27% will be over 67. And get this, an astonishing 13% will be over 89.
13% over 89. That's a lot.
It really is. And this isn't just a German thing, it's a global trend. You see it across much of Europe, parts of Asia, even North America, just maybe at different paces.
Okay.
But this raises that important question. How is this discussed? How do we talk about it? The public discourse around these figures is often, well, loaded with alarm, using terms like rapidly aging or graying.
Yeah, you see those everywhere.
You do. Major newspapers have used headlines like rapidly or even racy aging. Back in 2010, the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung conjured these, quote, horrifying visions of Germany being overtaken by France in population size, like it's some kind of competition.
Right, a demographic arms race.
Exactly. This kind of, well, fear-mongering frequently leads to this public perception of an older people's republic, or a pensioners' democracy. The rhetoric often suggests that the old people are just this monolithic block all united by one interest. Securing lavish pensions, effectively plundering the young, as former German President Roman Herzog once put it in his dystopia. It's a narrative that often blames older generations for societal problems, framing them as a burden.
So, okay, on one hand, we're being told the sky is falling because there are too many older people and they're supposedly draining all the resources.
That's the narrative.
Yet, here's where it gets really interesting, and you touched on this contradiction. This study points out that despite these dire warnings about a demographic collapse, there's this implicit, almost contradictory expectation for the young, old, people in their 60s and 70s to remain incredibly active and productive.
Yes, that's the tension.
We celebrate those remarkably spry 100-year-olds. We hear phrases like 70 is the new 60. It feels like society is simultaneously afraid of and demanding from its older citizens. It's confusing.
Precisely. It's a profound ambivalence, isn't it? A real societal double bind.
Yeah.
On one hand, you have these demographic catastrophe scenarios. They often narrow their focus right down to the costs of care for the very old and frail.
Right, the burden argument.
Exactly. Reports like the AOK Care Report from 2017 get cited, highlighting potential future nursing shortages, the strain on welfare systems. And this can create a really misleading impression, suggesting that every single individual reaching old age will inevitably face an increased risk of needing long-term care and becoming, an economic liability.
Which isn't necessarily true for everyone.
Not at all. And what this often misses, as the source points out, is that people died in earlier times too, right? And they often needed care before death. The individual risk of needing care might not have changed as dramatically as the societal proportion of those needing care. That's a key distinction. But the narrative often simplifies this complex societal challenge into an individual burden, which just stirs up personal fears.
Okay, so that's one side, the fear side.
Right. Then on the other hand, there's this increasingly dominant narrative of the young old. These are the individuals described as healthier, more educated, possessing more resources, both material and immaterial, like skills and networks, than previous generations ever did.
The successful agers.
Sort of, yeah. And this narrative often comes with a subtle yet really powerful expectation, almost a demand, really, that these older people should contribute more to society. A 2010 report from the German Federal Ministry for Family Affairs, Senior Citizens, Women and Youth, explicitly stated, and I'm quoting roughly, the good endowment of older people with material and immaterial resources on average today should certainly benefit society as a whole.
Okay, so it's not just a suggestion.
It's framed as an obligation, almost. This isn't just about volunteering here and there. It's about pushing for later retirement, continuous learning, active social engagement to keep the ball rolling, rather than just leaning back. So this creates this profound tension, a societal fear of an aging burden conflicting directly with the expectation of active engagement and contribution from older individuals. It's like saying, we're kind of afraid of you, but we also really need you to solve our problems.
That is a strange position to put people in. So what does this all mean for us, the listeners, as we think about our own lives, our own futures? It means we're just constantly bombarded with these profoundly ambivalent portrayals of aging, some filled with hope and potential, others loaded with threat and dread.
Absolutely.
It's no wonder we often feel uncertain, maybe even anxious about our own future aging paths. We're living in this space of contradiction, just trying to figure out where we fit in all this.
It makes perfect sense to feel that way.
Building on that idea, then, of conflicting societal messages, let's turn to something even more personal. Our own perceptions of age. That simple question, how old are you, Seems straightforward, but this deep dive tells us it's anything but. The book argues quite strongly that there is no age in aging independent of our views on aging. What exactly do they mean by that? How can our views literally shape something as seemingly objective as age?
It's a really fundamental point they make. It raises this basic question about how we even define old. Chronological age is, of course, a factor. It gives us that simple number when someone asks, "How old are you?"
Hmm.
But the study argues that it's fundamentally arbitrary when it comes to the meaning of age.
Arbitrary. How so?
Well, consider retirement ages, for example. The source points out these are entirely socially constructed. They differ historically. I mean, retirement systems are a relatively recent invention, barely over a century old in most places.
Right.
And they vary wildly across countries. They can even change overnight due to political decisions or economic shifts, as we've seen with all the debates about raising the retirement age. Yet these arbitrary markers profoundly impact how we perceive age. They shape this crucial dividing line between working life and old age. The study specifically mentions that a significant part of our views on aging in Western industrialized nations is related to whether a person is still participating in working life or not anymore. This really highlights that our understanding of age isn't some fixed natural phenomenon. It's, to a very large extent, socially produced. It's shaped by cultural norms, by institutional structures like retirement.
Okay.
So the core message here is that aging is largely a social and individual construction. Our expectations, our images, our attitudes about old age, they don't just describe what old age is like, they actively shape it. We, through our collective beliefs and our individual interpretations, kind of create our own age and aging experience. It's not just a purely biological process happening to us, divorced from our minds or society.
That concept gets incredibly personal then. The idea that our own views on aging become a self-fulfilling prophecy, that we might actually be creating our future through our present beliefs. How does that intricate process work? Can you walk us through it?
It's a really powerful mechanism, and the research clearly outlines it in this kind of three-step process. First, we acquire views on aging. This usually happens when we're young, right? And these views are primarily about other people, what sociologists call the out group.
Them, not us.
Exactly. Them, not us yet. And decades of research on age stereotypes show that these initial views are overwhelmingly negative. They often describe the old as frail, dependent, lonely, maybe rigid or out of touch. Think about the jokes we hear, the portrayals in movies or TV, or even just casual comments from family members about old people.
Yeah, they're everywhere.
They really are. And these views, once we absorb them, subtly shape how we interact with older individuals, maybe leading us to speak louder to them unnecessarily or to patronize them, or sometimes to simply avoid them.
Okay, so that's step one. Absorb the stereotypes.
Right. Second, at some point, these general views get internalized. This is the crucial turning point. It happens when we start asking what our own lives will look like in old age.
When it becomes about me.
Precisely. The trigger for this can be anything, really. Maybe you notice that first gray hair, or a new ache that doesn't go away. Maybe your parents begin to age noticeably, or maybe you simply start contemplating your future as your kids grow up and move out. When the self-referential question arises, what about my aging? Even if you're not chronologically old yet, those general, often negative ideas about the old suddenly transfer. They become your own self-views on aging. And this transfer is a critical moment for personal development because it can potentially taint your own self-concept with those negative stereotypes you picked up earlier.
Wow, okay. And the third step.
Third, these internalized self-views then directly shape your thoughts and your actions, leading to those self-fulfilling prophecies we mentioned. For example, if you deeply believe there's nothing new to learn in old age, you'll probably actively ignore opportunities for new hobbies, skills, or training courses, right? And thus you prove your belief right.
You make it true.
You make it true. If you think illness is just an inevitable side effect of getting old, you might neglect preventative health measures, diet, exercise, screenings making you more prone to sickness. Conversely, if you hold positive self-views, if you anticipate a future of continued growth, engagement, learning, learning, you're far more motivated to prepare, to stay active, to seek out new experiences. The source states it very strongly. There is hardly more powerful influence on human development in adulthood than our self-views on aging.
That's a bold claim.
It is, but the evidence supports it. It means your current beliefs about who you are and what you can do in old age are actively determining your actual life trajectory, for better or for worse. Your present beliefs are quite literally shaping your future reality.
So we're not just passively observing the old from a distance. We're essentially setting up our own future aging experience right now, based on these internalized ideas.
Yeah, it's the core idea, yes.
But is this view uniform? Does everyone see old the same way across the board? Or do these views vary wildly depending on, say, the context of their life?
That's exactly where the study gets really fascinating. They introduce this concept of domain specificity. And the study's core insight here is that our views on aging differ dramatically depending on the specific life domain we're considering. It's not a monolithic concept at all.
Okay, domain specificity. What does that look like in practice?
For instance, the study highlights a really compelling example. Think about a 35-year-old IP developer. In their work life, they might feel old, constantly fearing obsolescence in such a fast-paced field, right?
Technology changes so fast.
Exactly. Yet that same 35-year-old might simultaneously feel quite young in their family life if they're unmarried or perhaps just starting a family. Conversely, think of a 35-year-old psychologist, maybe re-entering the workforce after an extended parental leave. They might feel professionally young and maybe a bit insecure, yet physically they might no longer define themselves as young, and in their family role, they might see themselves quite positively as an old hand at parenting.
So multiple ages at once, depending on the context.
Precisely.
Okay.
The research meticulously assessed views on older adults across various domains: family, work, leisure, mental fitness, physical fitness, social relationships, personality, finances, a whole range. And they found that people's ideas and stereotypes varied significantly across these areas. For example, older people are often evaluated surprisingly positively in the work context, seen as reliable, experienced, possessing valuable institutional knowledge, that kind of thing.
Okay, positive there.
But they might be viewed less positively in domains like mental or physical fitness, or maybe social relationships. Which isn't surprising, really, given that those stereotypes of decrepitude and loneliness often dominate discussions in those areas.
Right, the common tropes.
Yeah. And perceived age thresholds also differ. In Germany, for example, the average age threshold for being considered old in the work domain was around 65, lower than in other domains and roughly corresponding to the mandatory retirement age there. This multidimensionality strongly demonstrates that aging is not a global or homogeneous phenomenon. Our perceptions are nuanced, they're context-dependent, and they're constantly shifting.
That makes so much intuitive sense. We really do compartmentalize different aspects of our lives, don't we?
We absolutely do.
But how do our deeply personal self-views, our views about our own aging, compare to these general views we hold about older people as a group? Do we hold ourselves to the same, often negative standards we apply to others, or do we give ourselves a bit of a break?
This raises a really important question, and the answer reveals a fascinating psychological tendency. The study found quite consistently that self-views on aging are significantly more positive than general views on older people.
More positive about ourselves.
Yes. This gap is particularly pronounced in the more private domains, things like family life, personality, health, appearance, autonomy. There's less of a difference, or the gap is smaller, in the more public or social domains like friendships, leisure activities, finances, or work. And this statistical effect is substantial, indicating it's a widespread phenomenon across different populations.
Okay, so why is that? Why do we see our own future aging so much more optimistically than we see aging in general, especially if the sample is representative?
That's the puzzle, right? The study suggests this optimistic perception of one's own future life situation is a kind of illusion. It seems to stem from a deeply ingrained belief that one can largely control one's own life and destiny even in old age. That somehow my aging will be different, it'll be better.
The "it won't happen to me" feeling.
Kind of, yeah. However, this illusion tends to narrow with increasing chronological age. As people gain more direct experience with the realities of aging, whether through personal changes or observing their peers and family members, their self-assessments become more realistic. The gap between their personalized views and their general views of aging gets smaller, particularly for those over 50.
Reality catches up a bit.
It seems so. But this isn't just a benign observation. Despite being more positive, those self-views are decisively influenced by the underlying, often negative, general perceptions of aging that we acquire early on. Remember step 1.
Right, absorbing the stereotypes.
Exactly. The source uses this really powerful phrase that captures the paradox. One could say that we end up discriminating against ourselves through negative views on aging.
Wow, discriminating against ourselves.
Yes. It means the societal stereotypes we absorb about the old can ultimately harm our own outlook, our own well-being, and even our preparation for our future selves.
That's incredibly profound. It's not just about what we think. It's also about what society explicitly and implicitly expects from us as we age. And the study talks about prescriptive age norms. What exactly are those, and how do these unwritten rules, which you said are often contradictory, shape our actual experience of aging?
Right, prescriptive age norms. They're essentially those unwritten, often unspoken rules about what older people should be like. They influence how we evaluate their behavior, and crucially, how they, in turn, feel they ought to behave. The study identifies two main types that, despite seeming like polar opposites, often coexist. And surprisingly, the data showed they even gain higher endorsement from older individuals themselves.
Older people endorse them more. That's counterintuitive.
It is, isn't it? The first norm is disengagement. This is the classic, maybe older norm. It expects older people to gradually withdraw from social roles, to make way for the younger generation, and definitely not to try and maintain a youthful identity or appearance beyond a certain point. Historically, some researchers even promoted this as a healthy, adaptive way for individuals to prepare for the end of life.
Okay, the graceful withdrawal idea.
Sort of. But the study points out that this norm often manifests as a subtle yet pervasive form of age discrimination. It criticizes active older people for not conforming, for example, when they don't vacate social or professional positions, or when they use resources for themselves or maintain youthful appearances. Such nonconformity can lead to negative labels like dogged, selfish, or clinging to youth. It's basically pressure to step aside.
Okay, that's disengagement. What's the other one?
The second is activation. This is the more recent, seemingly opposing norm. It expects older people to remain active, fit, engaged professionally and socially, and self-sufficient for as long as humanly possible.
The use it or lose it philosophy.
Exactly. This norm has strong socio-political roots. It's directly linked to calls for postponing retirement age, easing the burden on welfare systems like pensions and health insurance. The really alluring idea of being old without becoming old is a central part of this norm. It suggests that maintaining previous life activities is not only possible, but almost a personal responsibility, that we all should delay the onset of real old age through continuous effort.
So, step back or stay hyperactive. Conflicting messages again.
Totally conflicting. And this raises that important question, how do older people respond? Surprisingly, as I mentioned, the study found that both norms show higher endorsement among older individuals.
Why would they endorse both?
It indicates that older people internalize these societal expectations. Even if they explicitly reject the label of old for themselves, they constantly ask themselves, consciously or unconsciously, what do I have to do to behave and live appropriately for my age? It's similar to how people adopt other social roles, like becoming a parent or starting a new job. You orient to and internalize the social expectations associated with that role, even if the identity isn't explicitly embraced right away. It's this subtle but powerful societal pressure to conform, leaving older adults kind of caught between a rock and a hard place, pressured to withdraw, but also pressured to stay active.
Wow. So these norms are clearly deeply ingrained in how we think about aging. But do they play out differently around the world? Or is this a universal phenomenon we're all experiencing, regardless of culture?
Absolutely. The cultural differences are key. The study's multicultural approach is truly crucial here, allowing researchers to compare Western countries like Germany and the USA with Asian countries like Hong Kong and Taiwan, plus the Czech Republic. And it revealed some really fascinating differences, but also some commonalities.
Okay, what did they find?
Well, the general pattern observed was that Western countries generally exhibited more positive overall views on aging.
More positive in the West. Why might that be?
It could be linked to a greater emphasis on individual autonomy and that active aging ideal that's become increasingly prevalent in Western societies. You know, the idea of a fulfilling third age.
Right.
The Czech Republic, however, consistently showed the most negative assessments of older people across the board. The study speculates this might be due to the really precarious situation of older generations there after the systemic political changes following the collapse of communism. State support is often lacking. Opportunities for older people to personally improve their situation are limited, leading to a sense of vulnerability and a less optimistic outlook on old age overall.
That makes sense. The historical context matters.
Hugely. But what's truly fascinating is how domain specificity saves the day, so to speak, in these cross-cultural comparisons. While the overall attitudes in Asian countries might be less positive than in the West on average, they show comparatively positive views in social domains. Things like family, friends, and personality. This directly reflects traditional Asian values, respect, esteem, filial piety towards older people, stemming from their accumulated wisdom and experience. For example, an older person in Hong Kong might be deeply revered for their role as a family elder, even if general societal views on the physical aspects of aging are less optimistic than maybe in Germany or the US.
Ah, so it depends which aspect of aging you're talking about.
Exactly. This finding helps clarify why earlier meta-analyses looking at East-West differences in age attitudes were so mixed and heterogeneous. They might have just overlooked these crucial domain-specific nuances.
Interesting. And what about when people think old age actually starts? Does that vary?
Yes, significantly. Age thresholds, that is. When people believe old age actually begins, also differ across cultures. Western countries tend to see the onset of old age as occurring later than in Asian countries, particularly after the mandatory retirement age.
Leader in the West.
Generally, yes. In Asian cultures, the onset of old age seems more closely coupled with the end of working life. This perhaps reflects a tranquil life ideal, where retirement is seen as an opportunity for a quieter, more secluded life, often focused on family. In contrast, Western cultures tend to emphasize that active third age, post-retirement, characterized by continued engagement, travel, hobbies. So real old age often gets pushed conceptually further out, maybe until the fourth age, when physical and mental losses become undeniably apparent. This just highlights again that views on aging are not just views of old age. Views on aging shape our actual development in old age before it has even taken place. They're a fundamental, culturally embedded part of how we as societies and individuals construct what it means to grow old.
Okay, so given all these complex perceptions, the cultural nuances, the societal expectations, how do people actually prepare for aging? Is it just about saving money for retirement, putting cash aside? Or is there a much broader scope to this preparation idea?
That's a great question, and the study offers a really crucial nuance here by distinguishing between two main types of preparation. It definitely moves beyond just financial planning.
Okay, what are the two types?
First, there's what they call anticipative preparation action, APA. This is explicitly directed at coping with distant, uncertain future challenges or burdens. Think of it as a strategy to minimize undesirable effects down the road.
Like saving for retirement or maybe long-term care insurance?
Exactly. Making financial provisions for retirement years away, planning for potential care needs that might arise decades later, maybe considering end-of-life issues like drawing up a will or advance directives. It requires dealing with future events that might be hard, maybe impossible to predict in their exact form or timing. For instance, if you anticipate you might have mobility limitations in the future, APA might involve proactively choosing to live in an accessible apartment now, or even considering home modifications years before they're strictly necessary, rather than waiting until the problem is immediate and urgent.
Okay, so APA is about tackling specific future worries. What's the second type?
The second type is preparation-relevant activities. These are more about enhancing your personal resources and skills to cope with unexpected stressors that might arise in any phase of life, including old age. This connects directly to the concept of proactive coping in psychology.
Proactive coping.
Yeah, which focuses on maximizing desired events in a concrete, more immediate future. So while APA is about mitigating specific, undesirable future scenarios, these preparation-relevant activities are more about building general resilience, maintaining flexibility, enhancing your capabilities across the board.
Like what kinds of activities?
Could be anything, really. Continuous learning, staying physically active, deliberately maintaining strong social networks, developing new interests that can adapt if your circumstances change. It's about building a robust toolkit for life, essentially.
Got it. So how does our mindset, our view of the future, affect whether we do these things?
That was a core research question for the Aging is Future project. How does thinking about the future affect preparation? And the findings strongly indicate that having confident and concrete future perspectives, believing you actually have some agency over your future, rather than just passively letting it happen, leads to a significantly higher willingness to prepare both APA and the broader activities.
So optimism helps?
Optimism, but also a sense of control or agency. It reminds me of that classic sociological concept, the Thomas theorem. If men define situations as real, they are real in their consequences. What you believe about your future, whether you expect it to be gloomy and unmanageable or vibrant and full of potential, profoundly shapes how you act now. If you believe you'll be healthy and active, you're much more likely to engage in behaviors that support that outcome, like exercising regularly or pursuing new hobbies. If you believe your future will be fraught with challenges you can't handle, your preparation will likely focus just on mitigating those, which is still preparation, but it's often driven more by fear than by optimism or a sense of possibility. It's not just a mechanistic, self-fulfilling prophecy, perhaps, but more about accepting a personal reality you've constructed and adjusting your behavior and priorities accordingly.
That makes sense. Our mindset really does set the stage. But what about the practical timeline for all this preparation? When do people actually think they should start preparing for these different aspects of aging? Is there like a fixed age in our minds, or does it vary depending on what exactly we're preparing for?
This is where the study's innovative use of those graphical life rays comes in. It's pretty neat.
The sliders you mentioned.
Exactly. Instead of just asking participants to state a chronological age, like, at what age should you start saving, they use this intuitive visual tool. Participants moved sliders on a line that stretched from beginning of life to end of life. They use these sliders to indicate when they personally felt old age begins or when certain types of preparations should ideally start.
So it captures their subjective feeling of time.
Precisely. It allowed researchers to capture these highly subjective and nuanced timelines, which actually proved to be a very sensitive and valid method for reflecting age-related changes in perceptions. For example, they found the midpoint of 50 on the life ray correlated almost perfectly with a chronological age of about 44.6 years, showing just how well this subjective measure tracked with actual age, but in a more intuitive way.
Cool. So what did they find about the timing?
The timing findings were quite revealing. Across all respondents, generally, old age was perceived to begin around 65 years, which roughly aligns with traditional retirement ages in many Western countries.
Okay, around 65. But you mentioned cultural differences.
Right. Big time. There were significant cultural differences. For instance, U.S. respondents indicated a later onset of old age. They perceived it to begin somewhere between 69.5 and 78.0 years old.
Much later.
Much later. This contrasts sharply with Hong Kong, where it was seen as 60.3, 65.7 years, Taiwan, 58.0, 64.3 years, and the Czech Republic, 63.5, 66.8 years. This aligns with that tranquil life ideal we discussed in Asian cultures, where old age is more closely tied to the end of working life and maybe a more contemplative phase, whereas in Western cultures, there's that stronger emphasis on an active third age post-retirement, which seems to push the perceived onset of true old age further out.
And does the timing vary for different types of preparations?
Yes. Definitely. The timing of preparation also varied significantly by domain. For instance, preparing for finances might start much earlier in life, right? Aligning with long-term investment strategies, career planning. In contrast, preparing for dying and death is often perceived as something to address much, much later in life. And in some cultures, it's even actively refused or avoided in early or middle adulthood due to discomfort or maybe superstition.
Right.
What's fascinating here is that deviations from these sort of normative timings, the generally accepted times, to start thinking about these things can lead to subtle but pervasive social feedback. If you start preparing too early for something like care needs, people might dismissively say, oh, you still have all the time in the world, or don't worry about that now.
Yeah, I can imagine that.
Conversely, if you prepare too late for something like retirement savings, you might face pointed questions from others, or even harsh self-criticism about how things are going to work out later in life. This just highlights how societal expectations subtly, yet powerfully, influence our personal choices about when and how to prepare for aging. We're always navigating these implicit timelines.
It's clear preparation is really multifaceted, and the timing is definitely nuanced. But preparing for anything usually involves both benefits and costs, right? It's a trade-off. What did the study find about the subjective pros and cons of preparation? And stepping back a bit, who do people actually believe is responsible for all this preparation? Is it seen as a purely personal burden, a family obligation, or does society have a role?
Great questions. The study meticulously examined both the subjective benefits and costs of preparing for aging, and it revealed this complex interplay of motivations and apprehensions.
Okay, let's start with the benefits. What did people see as the upside?
For benefits, people largely reported that proactive preparation helps maintain their autonomy and independence in later life. That was a big one. Also, relieving potential burdens on others, their family, or even on their future selves, and significantly, just increasing their sense of security and peace of mind right now.
Makes sense. Did older people see more benefits?
Interestingly, yes. Older people generally experienced more personal benefits from their preparation than younger ones did, particularly in countries like the USA, Germany, and the Czech Republic. This likely because they are closer to actually experiencing the outcomes of their preparations, right? They can see the payoff more clearly.
Okay. But what about the downsides? The costs?
Right. There are also very real costs. And these aren't just financial costs. They include things like subjective restrictions, maybe feeling tied down by financial planning, emotional burdens, the anxiety of thinking about potential illness or death, and also the inherent risk that some preparations might turn out to be useless or unnecessary in the end. You save diligently for long-term care you never end up needing.
True, you can't predict everything.
Exactly. And older people reported more burdens and risks for specific domains, especially when it came to preventing loneliness, preparing for potential care needs, and preparing for dying and death. This is understandable, as older people often have more direct experience with the complexities of caregiving for loved ones or confronting mortality themselves, making them acutely aware of the associated difficulties and the emotional toll.
And culturally, any differences in perceived costs?
Yeah, culturally, Chinese countries, Hong Kong, and Taiwan in this study generally associated more costs and burdens with preparation than Western countries did, except perhaps for housing. This might reflect different cultural norms around family obligations, maybe a more fatalistic view of future challenges, or just different economic realities. And this often links to that concept of temporal discounting.
Temporal discounting, what's that?
It's the psychological tendency for people to devalue future costs or benefits compared to immediate ones. It's why we might postpone difficult tasks like making a will or having that tough conversation about end-of-life wishes for immediate relief. We exhibit a present preference rather than a strong future preference, even if we know logically we should plan ahead.
Procrastination, basically.
In a way, yeah, but it's a well-documented psychological bias. Now, regarding responsibility, the study explored whether people believe it's society's job, the family's job, or their own personal responsibility to prepare for these various aspects of aging. And this is a crucial question because different welfare state traditions and cultural norms profoundly shape these perceptions.
Right, like whether you expect the government to provide pensions or care.
Exactly. In Germany, for example, with its robust social security system, people might attribute a greater share of financial responsibility to governmental systems. The study found that older participants generally tended to lean toward a more balanced view, favoring a kind of shared responsibility across all three, society, family, and the individual. But there were significant country differences, reflecting these distinct welfare state traditions and cultural norms. For instance, when it comes to end-of-life preparation, many people value self-determination above all, so they attribute responsibility primarily to themselves. But for something like long-term care, there's often an expectation of family support alongside societal provision. It really highlights that ongoing societal debate about who bears the primary responsibility for the challenges and opportunities of an aging population.
That makes perfect sense. It seems like most people want to live long, right? But there's this massive asterisk attached to that desire, only if healthy. What did the study find about that ideal versus the often, messier reality of an extended lifespan?
Yeah, that if healthy caveat is huge. This raises a profoundly important question about desired versus expected lifespan. The study used two key questions. How old would you like to be? And how old do you expect to be? The difference between those gave them a measure of subjective life expectancy discrepancy.
And what was the general finding?
Overwhelmingly, most people wish to live slightly longer than they actually expected to live. But, and this is the critical caveat, only if healthy. This health fixation is a really pervasive ideal, especially in Western cultures.
Only if healthy. How many people felt that way?
Get this, only a small minority, just 12% of all participants across the cultures, said they'd want to live as long as they wished, even if they were seriously ill or needed care.
Only 12%.
Yeah. A significant portion, around 52%, expressed considerable uncertainty about that specific scenario, indicating a really strong reservation about longevity if it comes with significant impairment.
Wow, was that different across cultures too?
Yes, interestingly, this uncertainty about living under impairment was even stronger in the Eastern cultures studied, Hong Kong and Taiwan. There, a majority of respondents were uncertain or explicitly wished for a shorter life if they were seriously ill or dependent. In contrast, in the Western cultures, the USA, Germany, the Czech Republic, a majority expressed a desire to live longer than expected, but always with those crucial health reservations firmly in place.
So a stronger desire for longevity in the West, but only under ideal conditions.
Exactly. It highlights this powerful autonomy focus in Western aging ideals. The thought of dependence on others is often framed implicitly or explicitly as a horrifying image to be avoided at all costs. Society often promotes self-sufficiency and independence as the ultimate goals for later life. And this leads to a strong aversion to becoming a burden. This also helps explain why preparatory actions, both APA and the broader activities, are often primarily devoted to maintaining one's own health, functional capacity, and self-determination. The societal ideal isn't just a long life, it's a healthy and autonomously lived long life. And that places immense pressure on individuals to maintain this ideal, even as their bodies and circumstances might inevitably change.
Okay, this next part of the deep dive really challenged my assumptions, and I suspect it might for many listeners too. I think many of us just assume that older people, especially after retirement, are suddenly swimming in free time, right? Endless leisure stretching out before them.
The golden years fantasy.
Exactly. But this study flips that right on its head. It talks about this tension between everyday time abundance and biographical time poverty. What is that all about, and how does it actually play out in people's lives?
Yeah, that's a common perception, the endless free time. And what's truly fascinating here is how the transition out of paid employment creates this profound and often really paradoxical shift in time perception. On one hand, absolutely, the rigid corset of a fixed work schedule falls away. There's a tangible, immediate sense of increased free time, an abundance of it, seemingly.
More hours in the day to fill.
Right. People entering retirement are, in a very real sense, stepping into a realm of leisure. Their days now seem open to their own free disposal, no longer dictated by a boss or a punch clock. One interviewee in the study even described time as my capital and himself as a capitalist in time.
Catalyst in time. I like that.
It's evocative, isn't it? It emphasizes this newly gained resource and the freedom it apparently brings. So that's the everyday time abundance.
Okay, but what about the biographical time poverty?
Right.
Simultaneously, the end of working life often brings the limitedness of the lifespan and the unavoidable fact of one's own death into the experience and expectation horizon. For many people, their subjective life narrative, their biography, often feels like it culminates with the end of their working life. Old age isn't always seen as its own distinct, vibrant chapter, but sometimes more as a winding down, an epilogue.
The end of the story, almost.
For some, yes. This creates a psychological tension, a sense of biographical time poverty as the remaining lifetime shrinks, and the future becomes less distant, more finite. This helps explain that paradox you hear sometimes. People who objectively have all the time in the world often find themselves saying, oh, pensioners never have time.
I've heard that. Right. There's an increasing presentism that emerges as the remaining lifetime feels shorter, which can lead to a perceived compression of everyday time, despite its actual abundance. This sense of time shortage, or maybe the pressure to make the most of the remaining time, is one of the subtle limits of that ageless self-image that many older adults strive to maintain. They might feel this internal pressure to do something with all this time, leading paradoxically to a new kind of busyness.
Capitalist in time. I love that phrase. It really captures that sense of newfound agency, doesn't it?
It does.
But it sounds like not everyone experiences time in retirement the same way. The study identifies different everyday time styles. Can you elaborate on those? What do they find?
This raises an important question, and the qualitative research, particularly those deep, problem-centered interviews, really brought these nuances to life. It identified 3 pretty distinct age-specific everyday time styles among retirees, reflecting very different approaches to navigating this newfound abundance of time.
Okay, what's the first style?
First, there's the investing time style. These individuals often come from backgrounds with secure incomes, and typically they had a voluntary, maybe even an early exit from demanding work lives. They intentionally use their retirement time for social engagement and what the researchers call heteroproductive activities, meaning activities that benefit others.
Like volunteering, or maybe grandchild care.
Exactly. Extensive volunteering, significant caring for grandchildren, taking on major community roles. This often takes on the character of a full-time, self-imposed job. They are literally seeking a return on their invested time, much like a capitalist invests capital. They often find new purpose and status in these contributions. And importantly, this strategy is almost always based on a secure household income, because substantial social engagement, like extensive volunteering or travel to help family, often has real economic costs.
Right, you need the resources to invest your time that way. Okay, what's the second style?
Second, we have the enjoyment mode. For these folks, their transition to retirement was also usually self-determined, maybe planned for, and connected to a good pension or savings. They are often described as exuberant about the time gained. Their focus is really on personal indulgence, on using their time fully for themselves and their immediate families.
The golden years ideal realized.
Pretty much. This is the extended, even endless vacation mindset. The time pressure from their employment life is replaced by an emphasis on leisure, travel, pursuing hobbies, and simply savoring life. They are actively reclaiming time that was previously constrained by work obligations.
Sounds nice. What's the third style?
Finally, there's the filling or killing time style. This approach is often associated with an involuntary exit from employment, perhaps due to health issues or redundancy or economic downturns, and typically a comparatively lower old age pension. For these individuals, there was often little room for independent organization or self-determination in their working lives, maybe routine manual labor or something similar. And unfortunately, they often continue to struggle with effective time management and finding meaning in retirement.
So the structure of work is gone, and nothing replaces it.
It seems that way for some. Their daily routines can be characterized by a lack of purposeful activity, a struggle to find meaning, sometimes even a feeling of being adrift or bored. Their daily waking and sleeping times might even still reflect the externally dictated schedules from their old working lives, indicating a continued lack of self-determination or agency over their own time.
That's quite sad. And does this link back to inequality?
Absolutely. If we connect this to the bigger picture, these patterns powerfully reinforce social inequalities. Higher occupational status and income in earlier life often translate directly into more autonomy and agency in time management that continues well into old age. Those who are accustomed to self-determination, maybe intellectual stimulation, in their working lives tend to have a more sovereign and purposeful way of dealing with free time after retirement.
Makes sense.
In contrast, those from lower occupational statuses or those with fewer financial resources often struggle profoundly with the unstructured, underdetermined nature of retirement. So yes, social inequalities accumulated over a lifetime tend to reproduce themselves in old age, highlighting that freedom and agency in retirement are not universally distributed, but often remain a privilege linked to earlier life chances.
So time sovereignty isn't a given for everyone. It's really influenced by your earlier life circumstances, your resources.
Very much so.
And what's really striking is this underlying pressure you mentioned, almost a busy ethic that seems to persist even into retirement. It's like you can't just be or simply enjoy quiet time without having to justify it somehow.
Precisely. This is a key finding that truly challenges that romanticized perception of retirement as just a period of pure, unadulterated leisure and freedom. This study observes what they call a subjectively perceived need to justify one's own mode of everyday time practices.
A need to justify your free time.
Yeah. Now, this isn't unique to older age, but it seems significantly amplified here because of that perceived abundance of time. This busy ethic, the pervasive idea that activity is inherently good and valuable, while passivity or idleness is bad or unproductive, provides a strong sense of continuity with working life norms. It functions as a kind of psychological and social solution to the problem of establishing continuity and meaning between employment and retirement. It allows individuals to maintain symbolic adherence to societal norms for agency, purpose, and contribution.
So even if you're not working for pay, you still feel you should be doing something.
That seems to be the pressure. Even in retirement, the day must be filled with something. Investment activities, especially those heteroproductive ones helping others, can take on a full-time character, becoming almost a quasi-job, giving individuals a new sense of identity and societal contribution. Even enjoyment is often implicitly measured against past work-related deprivations, validating leisure as a deserved vacation after years of labor. The underlying social expectation is subtle but powerful. One is free, but not free to do nothing.
One is free but not free to do nothing. That says a lot.
It really does. It indicates that retirement as a social institution is still a relatively underdetermined phase of life. There aren't universally accepted social scripts for how to do retirement properly. This leads individuals to self-impose structure and meaning primarily through activity, often mirroring the productivity norms of their prior work lives.
So time well-being is a better term.
Exactly. This is why the study prefers the term time well-being over simpler concepts like time wealth or time sovereignty. The sheer quantity of time isn't what matters most. It's the quality of the experience and, crucially, the ability to dispose of that time autonomously in a way that feels meaningful and self-directed. However, this real autonomy in the disposal of time often remains, as the study puts it, a milieu-bound attitude toward life reserved for older people who are better off, those with greater resources and a history of self-determination. For many, the perception of mastery over one's life, or time mastery, is often a thoroughly effective fiction maintained through routines and constant activity. This societal pressure for older people to justify how they spend their time is a subtle but powerful force, making it clear that a morally neutral free time doesn't truly exist in old age. It's always judged, implicitly or explicitly, by the prevailing busy ethic.
Wow, what an absolutely illuminating deep dive we've taken today. We started by looking at those sometimes alarming headlines about an aging society. And we quickly found ourselves realizing that age is so much more nuanced, so much more personal, and profoundly influenced by how society views it, how we view it.
It's incredibly layered, isn't it?
It really is. We've seen how our own views of the old can become our very own self-fulfilling prophecies, how aging isn't some uniform experience but changes dramatically across different life domains, work, family, health, and how even something as seemingly simple as free time in retirement is riddled with these complex social expectations and deep-seated inequalities.
Indeed, it's been a fascinating journey through the research. And if we ask ourselves, what are the most important takeaways here? The project's most significant empirical finding is crystal clear. Old age is not a uniform phenomenon. It is as diverse as life itself. It's not a single fixed destination we all arrive at. The authors describe it beautifully, I think, as a long, quiet river that does not flow into the sea of old age at a fixed date, whether that's a specific birthday or the moment you stop working. We've truly uncovered the multidimensionality and intra-individual diversity of aging, how one person can feel old in their work domain because of specific competencies or physical demands, but simultaneously feel much younger and vibrant in their partnership or family life because different criteria and resources matter in each context. This fundamentally challenges that common understanding of old age as some homogeneous phenomenon. It highlights the immense variability not just between individuals, but also within individuals over the course of their own lives.
That diversity is key.
Absolutely. And importantly, the study also underscores the inherent vulnerability of old age. Now, this vulnerability doesn't erase existing social inequalities that have accumulated over a lifetime. Rather, it kind of sets a shared framework within which the social diversity of aging emerges. While aging is controllable and malleable to a degree through proactive efforts like we discussed, limits undeniably exist: biological limits, social limits, personal constraints. And these limits are experienced very differently depending on one's resources and position in society. Vulnerability isn't evenly distributed either.
So what does this all mean for us, the listeners, as we move forward from this conversation? This deep dive certainly feels like a powerful call to action, or at the very least, a profound call to rethink our deeply ingrained perceptions about aging.
Absolutely, I think it has to be. The authors argue quite forcefully that societal descriptions of old age are often profoundly unbalanced. They swing wildly between an unrealistic idealization. Think of those images of perfectly wise, serene, always available grandparents, and a far more prevalent deficient image characterized by physical and mental limitations, chronic illness, loneliness, and financial burden.
The extremes.
Exactly. They contend that society, particularly Western society, harbors a fundamental problem with aging, a discomfort, and older adults, unfortunately, pay the price for this societal discomfort. Those seemingly positive norms we discussed, disengagement on one hand, activation on the other, they argue these can be misused and perverted by aging politics. They can become subtle demands for renunciation, basically expecting older adults to be self-sufficient, undemanding, not a drain on resources or performance obligation, mobilizing their resources, their time, their energy for the benefit of society. Both of these effectively delegitimize retirement as a period of genuine rest, freedom, or personal enjoyment for its own sake.
So even the positive norms can be problematic.
They can be weaponized, in a sense. And this leads directly to a pervasive and really insidious issue: ageism. The study points out quite starkly that the numerous discriminatory practices older people face have broad social acceptance, if not explicit approval.
Wow. Broad social acceptance.
Yeah. Unlike sexism or racism, where there are active public and political struggles for recognition, legal protection, and social change, ageism often flies under the radar. They note that ageism is not only generally uncommon as a political concept. In German-speaking countries, there is not even a word for this phenomenon.
No word for ageism. That's startling.
It is startling. This linguistic void signifies perhaps a deep-seated societal devaluation of old age, where discrimination against older adults is so normalized, so baked into our assumptions and structures that it often goes unnamed and therefore unchallenged.
That idea that society, and maybe even we ourselves, unconsciously internalize these negative views, leading to that kind of self-discrimination you talked about, is incredibly powerful. It makes you realize just how much of our experience of aging is socially and culturally constructed, rather than purely biological destiny.
It truly is. And the profound call emanating from this research, I think, is for collective and matter-of-factly accepting the social reality of a long life and asserting a fundamental right to be old.
A right to be old. What does that mean in practice?
It means advocating for an equal right in any phase of life to be allowed to be as one is, including being old in case of doubt. It means challenging that extreme health fixation and autonomy focus often seen in Western cultures, where any dependence on others is presented as this horrifying image to be avoided at all costs. Instead, it argues for a society that values the full spectrum of aging experiences, including vulnerability, including interdependence, not just independence.
Valuing the whole experience, not just the good parts.
Exactly. It also means pushing gerontology, the scientific study of aging, to broaden its focus beyond just health promotion and activation strategies. Instead, it should prioritize what truly matters for older people's actual life satisfaction and well-being. Things like ensuring adequate material resources, fostering genuine social integration and participation, and cultivating societal recognition and respect for older adults in all their diversity, not just the ones who fit the active aging mold.
So, what stands out to you, our listener, after this deep dive? Think about the everyday conversations you hear about aging, maybe around the dinner table or at work, or think about the expectations you might unconsciously hold for your own future self. This deep dive makes it incredibly clear. Our views on aging aren't just passive observations. They are active, potent forces shaping our reality, both individually and collectively. What societal narratives about age do we unconsciously internalize? And how can we begin to challenge them, not just for ourselves, but for everyone around us? How can we assert that fundamental right to be old that embraces the inherent diversity and complexity of later life, rather than demanding conformity to narrow, often contradictory ideals of perpetual youthfulness or constant productivity? It's a profound question, isn't it? One that really shapes our collective future and ultimately our own personal journey through time.